like health and education, then it's a very good program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lole-Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak on this Corrections Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, in times past, we confronted great challenges, not with slogans and silly appellations for parliamentary bills, but by deploying our best and brightest in search of facts that would lead to meaningful and realistic solutions. New Zealand First is dedicated to ensuring that our nation's prisons, probation services and other places of detention are operated in a manner that will comply with legislation and laws of our country. Furthermore, that international human rights principles are upheld through the introduction of robust and vigorous policies, which will give New Zealand better opportunity to address one of the highest incarceration rates in the developed world. We all share in the notion of promoting a fair and effective criminal justice system in which incarceration is used as a last resort. Its purpose must be to prepare prisoners for release and productive law-abiding lives at the earliest possible time. Community involvement and better education are important to form the foundation of rehabilitation and reintegration. This is not necessarily restricted to just reading and writing, but also practical life experiences. These experiences help obtain a better understanding of our society, including the importance of those traditional family and community values. More importantly, our goal is to reduce reoffending instead of building more prisons like the current government as if they are in the business of growing criminal offending. This country must focus on creating more employment to redirect offenders' focus from community crimes in order to become law-abiding citizens of our nation. The growing gap between those who have and those who have not, the persistence of poverty and its relation to crime are real and present a danger to social cohesiveness in New Zealand. We as parliamentarians must ensure that conditions of confinement are constitutional and consistent with health and safety regulations and human dignity. For too long now, New Zealand's correction policy makers have been too busy or preoccupied in developing plans in order for many of them to stay employed, knowing very well that those plans have failed for so many years. These plans are based on what is happening in the United Kingdom, Canada and Western Europe. For far too long, New Zealand corrections decision-making advocates have been too busy trying to look busy without doing anything at all, just so that they have something to report on, regardless of whether they are successful or not. It's no wonder this government is becoming increasingly famous for lip service and window dressing. It is time we have some accountability that includes this current national government. I am saying everything that's nice, Maurice Williamson. The current incarcerated population among young generations, especially Māori and Pacific peoples, can no longer and should no longer be tolerated, David Bennett. It is simply not acceptable. However, this Corrections Amendment Bill can now be viewed as a way forward with some progress. The goal set out in this bill will result in a criminal justice system that respects individual rights and increases compliance, public safety within the corrections environment. Having legislation that defines liability on property claims will not only save money and time, but it will also stipulate better guidelines for correction staff and outline responsibility that is required of prisoners. We all acknowledge that prison reform must address problems currently plaguing the incarceration system, including private prisons run by and for profit organisations or corporations who drive the demand for more people to be locked up, while at the same time ducking public scrutiny and accountability, Mark Mitchell. And what's up smoking ban? Jackie Dean has a lot to learn about prison environment and how they operate, Jackie Dean. Tobacco, listen to this, tobacco is an insidious drug. It is. Some say it is harder to kick than heroin. And I'm sure the member Mark Mitchell will know that from his previous employment. Initially, a massive drive was put in place to rid prisons of tobacco. Prisoners were put on notice, target and timelines were met. Following that, there has been little, very little, in the way of education and ongoing treatment to enable prisoners to stop smoking and stay smoke-free. Yes, I understand a few nicotine patches have been handed out. However, many of these have been brewed up and mixed with tea leaves for the desperate to smoke. What has happened is an extension to the black market in prisons. So along with drugs, tobacco has become a real money spinner for prisoners and gangs. There is a constant flow of prisoners through the corrections system, many who stay a few months, then they go back into an environment where smoking is the norm, then return again. These people won't kick the habit with punitive measures, while prison staff are expected to be custodians, as well as case officers, welfare officers, counsellors, providers of recreational activities, and more. Better rehabilitation plans will help. Denying prisoner access to suitable rehabilitative initiatives, plus restricting appropriate programs with suitable cultural perspectives, inhibits successful rehabilitation of prisoners and can exacerbate or create mental illness. Prisons should focus on safety rehabilitation and effective use of suitable providers. Providers who deliver real outcomes for prisoners, instead of providers engaged by staff for the sake of ticking the box, regardless of whether the program works or not. I was rather astonished to be advised, Mr. Speaker, that bureaucratic procedures and more red tape has once again hindered progress in the rehabilitation of Pacific prisoners at the Whakawhaola Pacific Focus Unit at Spring Hill Corrections Facility. While correction officers have requested for more community involvement in Pacific programs that have been successful in the past 4 to 5 years, it is a shame when some ill-advised manager who claims to be an expert and appears to think he or she knows better drives the local communities to whom these prisoners are more likely to return to give up in supporting our prisons. They have been treated poorly and sometimes unfairly, and yet these are the very people that the Corrections Department and this country need to assist with the rehabilitation of men and women in prisons, in addition to our combined efforts to reduce offending and reoffending. So let me remind members of this House, especially the members of the national government. Lyndon B. Johnson's words were these: you do not examine legislation in the light of the benefits it will convey if properly administered, but in the light of the wrongs it will do and the harms it would cause if improperly administered. So we do support the bill, but we do oppose the smoking ban along with other loopholes that it has created. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Jamie Lee Ross.
Mr. Speaker, I was looking forward to a speech from